Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining me today. And my friend Ron Nielsen, he's the author of the amazing book, The History of Federal Lands in the United States.com. That is a mouthful for sure. And make sure you type it right when you go in to try to find his book, or you can click in the comment section and click on the link to buy a copy of the book to support the author and to be able to become part of the solution that everybody's looking at becoming. So, as we typically do, I wanted to go through a review of the last week's or the last video we did, which was book video 11. We basically covered from pages 40 to 43. When you guys look at the title and it says like one page, there's a lot of information we covered. Don't think it's
Oh
not
yeah.
important. It's absolutely hugely important. So, Ron, I guess I should just say, great to see you, my friend.
Well, it's good to be seen, Tom. It's good to see you, buddy.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much. So,
Loving the time, man. Loving the
yeah,
time.
thanks. Purple. Yeah. Anyway, so in book 11, we talked about when Congress passes legislation, what actually happens, which is kind of a neat little important piece of information. Let's see, what else did we talk? We talked about the states being the dots on the map. So I think we talked about sovereignty and what's actually sovereignty and what's applicable to the states. I think we talked about Idaho, that the Idaho as the geographical boundary wasn't actually created as a union. It was actually the dots on the map that weren't state owned. Is that right? And then
uh yes, that's
yeah.
right. Yeah. The
So
dots on the
then
map. That's how we need to view the state of
right.
Idaho, but not just the state of Idaho, any of the states where there's a whole lot of red. That's how we need to
Right.
view them.
Okay, so we talked about Lava Ridge quite a bit. We talked about SCOTUS in Article 1 and Article 3. We talked about incorporation. We talked about what is being admitted into the Union, which is what you talked about. I think that might be a good place for you to start, if you don't mind, if we could just back up to that,
Sure.
because I think it's really, really important. We talked about the 2005 law with the 20-year shelf life, which you're going to go into, part 368. We talked about the federal gun laws are actually applicable, which I picked guns because I think we picked guns because it's a sensitive issue to the people here in Idaho, and
Right.
so I think that's important. So we basically talked about what applicable on under federal authority actually is. We talked about admission acts. We talked about the 14th Amendment, and we talked a little bit about the slaughterhouse cases. So again, Ron, thanks for joining me today. I'm really, really stoked that we get to do another video, and I'm hoping that there are more people that are interested with every video that we do.
Well, me as well. And I guess we'll have to kick this one off uh going back to the Illinois thing a little bit because there's some, as you were saying, we need to know what's being admitted into the union, right? So there's this whole what, and when we say that, when we ask that question, what we're really asking, and this is where it comes up again, you cannot escape this word, incorporation, right? There's no escaping the word as much as people don't want to deal with it. I'm sorry, but this is the way that the government has done what it's done. You can't convert it to another word and then have us have a conversation about solutions. The only way that we're going to be able to take on this beast is to understand the incorporation, unincorporation issue. So we're going to have to get into it again.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
explain. Then you have to
So,
then you'll have to explain briefly what those are again, in case
okay,
somebody forgot like I did from the last video.
here's what I'm going to do instead. I'm going to put on the screen. I'm going to do a screen share, and it's the 6-point doctrine that the Supreme Court arrived at out of the Downs versus Bidwell case, and it contains this issue within it. So here it is. Okay, bring this up. And I put this in the book. This whole territorial doctrine is in the book. So anybody that has the book, I forget what page this is on, but go to that page and bring it up. Okay, let's see. Let me blow this up a little bit here. Blow this bad boy up. Hold on a second. Okay, well, let's just do it this way. I'll just screen share what I've got. And we'll see if we can do it that way. Can you see that at all?
It's on page 70 for anybody that's looking. Territorial doctrine for Downs and Bidwell versus Bidwell. Okay. Yeah, yeah. If you can open it, yeah, we can see that.
Okay. Let's go to point 2. I'm trying to blow this up, but it's not working. I don't have my blow up tool here. Oh, here we go. Yeah, it's a little too much. There we go. All right. So look at point 2. That territories are not states within the meaning of revised statute section 709, permitting writs of error from this court in cases where the validity of a state statute is drawn into question. Okay. This is one of the jurisdictions under Article 3 to get writ of cert to the Supreme Court. Okay. One of the issues that the territories had is that there was no ability of people in the territories to go to the Supreme Court. That door was closed to them. The only courts that they can get any justice in were called circuit courts. Not district courts, circuit courts. Okay. We're going to get into the court structure a little bit. It's coming up quick, though. So we're just going to get into this here. So when you look at this doctrine, what it's saying is you can even look at point 1, that the District of Columbia and the territories are not states within the judicial clause of the Constitution giving jurisdiction to cases between citizens of different states. So basically, when you go through this, it says this. Number 1, number 2, number 3. The District of Columbia and the territories are states, as that word is used in treaties with foreign powers with respect to the ownership, disposition, and inheritance of property.
Oh, right.
What are we saying here? If it's federally owned, it's territorial. If it's territorial, it is not a part of the United States, not incorporated under the 3 points of the doctrine, moving into the 4th point. That the territories are not within the clause of the Constitution provided for the creation of a Supreme Court and such inferior courts as Congress may see fit to establish.
Or in other words, what the book refers to as it doesn't follow the flag. Right?
Right. So
Okay.
these concepts all tie together. They are not individual and separate. They all tie together. This doctrine is a killer on 2 points. Number 1, it's a killer against private rights in the territories. And number 2, point 6 of the doctrine is a killer against the United States because of some of the actions that it had done previously to the seizure of the lands that it can't get out from now. Okay. How does this tie in with everything that we're talking about and Indiana and the parcel land? So, like, we need to know what's being admitted into the Union and what does that mean? Admission into the Union is any land that was granted to the state. What are we talking about? Well, let's just look at it. Let's just look at it. We got to do another screen share. Okay. Can you see that?
Yes.
That's the book. Okay.
Page 44, yeah.
And the state of Illinois was seen as much further down the chain, and the private ownership was a dominant factor, and more likely due to the state already having secured most of the land it needed for state purposes. So I put in section 6. This is out of the Illinois Admission Act. Illinois. And be it further enacted that the following propositions be offered to and the same are hereby the said territory convention of Illinois, when formed, for their free acceptance or rejection, which, if accepted by the convention, shall be obligatory upon the United States and the said state. Let's stop right there. There was a negotiation going on between Illinois and the federal government. They were negotiating what parts of what lands that the state was going to get. This is after citizens the land had been made available to the citizens for sale. After, like, the state came later in the equation, and it only got enough land for it to conduct its state business, just enough for that and no more. Everywhere where you look in the admission acts and everywhere where you look in the government's intention, they never intended for the states to get more land than they needed to just do their basic state functions and for schools and this sort. But we're going to get into that, right? So you had a negotiation taking place here between the two entities, between the state and the federal government, a negotiation. So let's clear the air really quick. If the land program would have been done correctly, the federal government would own very little, and the state would own very little, and the citizens would own it all. If the land program would have been done according to its disposal mandate set out in the Northwest Ordinance. Clearly, when you look at the admission acts, clearly when you look at the early legislation, this was the intent. Okay? All right, going on. First, that section numbered 16 in every township. So the government, we talked about this in an earlier video. The United States government had sent out surveyors. As soon as they acquired territory, they sent out the surveyors, and surveyors surveyed it up and divided it up into sellable lots. Right away. The entire United States had been divided up into sellable lots. First, that section numbered 16 in every township, and when such section has been sold or otherwise disposed of, other lands equivalent thereto, and as contiguous as may be, shall be granted to the state for the use of the inhabitants of such township for the use of schools.
Can you hold on to that thought for a minute?
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the questions I was going to ask is, and I think I know the answer, but I want to make sure. Let's see if I can embarrass myself. So a lot of the questions that I get when I talk about this issue is, but Tom, what you're basically saying is unconstitutional. And I'll say, well, no, that's not really the case, because what you're missing is Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2, that incorporates all of this stuff into the Constitution. Isn't that right?
So I think here's how I would answer that question if somebody asked me, and I have people say this to me before, and here's how I answer it. You're right. It is unconstitutional. Mm-hmm. It's extra constitution.
That's right. That's right. But so, I mean, so like, for example, we could say that the whole longstanding armies thing, right? You know, the Constitution talks about that. And then the Constitution will talk about, you know, the federal government and the 10 square miles, you know, and which would indicate that the creation of the Constitution would mean that state ownership was not only primary, but the federal ownership they had acknowledged was going to be extremely limited. So how can it be, according to the Constitution, it be extremely limited, while on the other hand, when we read your book, it looks like the federal government owns it all. So I mean, how do we deal with that?
It's a good question, and you're asking it at the right time, because I think that people just if anybody's been following these videos, and it looks like we've gotten a lot of views, so people are following what we're talking about here. This conflicts with everything they think they know about the land program, or they didn't even know there was a land program. Let's just say that nobody understood that there was a land program. right? So the level at which the government has done a deception upon the people is it's tremendous.
But so if they didn't know, would it be safe to say that the government entity itself was completely, there was a lack of continuity between the creation of the administrative state and the federal entity? But you just got through telling me a little while ago that that Thomas Jefferson was a part of the whole thing. So did they know, or did they not know? And
They
how?
didn't think it would become what it did,
Oh,
right?
okay.
So everybody that created the program thought and believed and intended that in the future, when the program was over, the state would have very little and the federal government would have very little and the citizens would have the bulk of the land. That's
Okay.
what they all intended to have happen.
Okay.
But what happened? Two things: a change in the way that they were going to do things from the Louisiana Purchase on, and then the Civil War.
Right.
That changed the entire dynamic. From the Civil War on, they're going, we're not doing this anymore for a variety of reasons: political reasons, national security reasons.
So the Constitution still existed and it still said what it said, but it's kind of like the whole Union Confederacy issue, right? I mean,
Yes, yes,
where we're just kind of like saying, okay, well, we think, I think the Constitution's pretty clear that we're a Confederacy and we're not a Union. But yet we had people that decided that that just wasn't going to be the case, and so they blamed the fact that the North ended up bludgeoning the South, and said, well, there goes the states' rights doctrine. That's out the window, and it
yeah,
was never really said. So this was a huge thing that I've been trying to think about how to talk about, because I know that when people are going to be getting this far into the video, they're going to be going, oh, wait a minute. Everything Ron's talking about is like the opposite of everything that I know about the Constitution.
right,
Constitution is
yeah,
supposed to limit federal power, it's supposed to do all this, and the states and the people and all this, and we're looking at this, and it's like federal exclusive jurisdiction, and no, 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 and vassal state arrangement, and all that kind of
yeah.
stuff. So
The United States government and the factions that seized control of it post Civil War have worked one hell of a mind virus, Jedi mind trick, on the entire population.
right,
That's what they've done. They
right,
did that purposefully because now, at post Civil War, it was a national security matter. And they still do it to this day. All the attacks against Donald Trump, national security matter. We have to do this because he's Donald Trump believes like we do. We believe that, and everybody watching these videos, they believe, well, wait a minute. The system of government that we thought we have, Ron's pointing to another system of government that's operational. He slapped this cooperative federal model label on it. Like, I don't even know what the hell he's talking about. And you wouldn't unless you go and you read a lot of case law.
but you know what? I just had a
But the Supreme
revelation.
Court's got to deal with this all the time.
This is a national security issue.
It
I
is.
mean, if you think about it,
It
because
is.
it is upsetting, the status quo that everybody is kind of kicked down the road. So it's not supposed to be seen as, and I don't want anybody to go, oh, here, we're going to shut this video off. I'm going to pretend that I never heard those guys. Those guys are extreme, whatever. It's not a matter of that. It's a matter of everything being national security is in order for the federal government to be able to maintain the status quo and maintain or implement exclusive jurisdiction wherever it can, maintain the vassal state arrangement as the states being the inferior to the feds. But what we're really doing is we're challenging the entire status quo of this, and we're basically just showing, as a matter of law and history and politics, the, how these two separate things actually come together to the best degree that they do, even though they don't. See, now they have me talking like that. Anyway, go on. Sorry.
Okay,
So
so
do you remember where you were?
not entirely.
Okay,
I
so
was,
we were talking about the 16th parcel, and I think it's important for people to remember that out of each of the parcels, every 16th parcel that was sold to the individual, right, was offered to the state for needful buildings and whatever, right?
No, not necessarily. Every 16th parcel that was surveyed, that was not already being allocated elsewhere, right? So I guess you could look at it as not being sold to the individual, but it was more. It's an appropriation thing, but we don't
For
need
the
to get
st-
in that.
for
For
the
the
states, though.
yes, yes,
Okay,
yes,
that's what I
yes.
wanted to make sure. Okay, good.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
Um, so whatever land was appropriated to the state, every 16th parcel in there would be allocated for a school, and that was
mhm.
part of the deal. So let me bring up
Well, and that
the
was page 44, where the each 16th parcel either dealt with school lands, grant for land or erection of public buildings, public lands, university land grants, penitentiary grants, agricultural college land grants, right? In that list
yeah,
that you had there on
that's right.
44. Okay. So if
Yeah, in fact,
anybody's
I'm going to do a
interested,
share screen again and bring that territorial doctrine up because I think
okay.
that's where we were. I was explaining. Now, this is out of the Downs versus Bidwell case. This doctrine is the reason why the Downs versus Bidwell case is central to the entire land issue. This it produced this doctrine. To understand what is in this doctrine, I couldn't understand it at first when I first read it. I didn't have the context for it because none of this made any freaking sense to me until I went through the government's land program from the beginning of the program till today. Then I went, oh, this that the Supreme Court produced is the exact same, is the exact opposite of what everybody believes the United States is. Right here, contained in the doctrine. All you got to do is read it.
Oh, so let's talk about that for a minute. We've got the Supreme Court that nobody. I didn't like them, and you obviously you disagreed with me or whatever. I disagreed with you or whatever because I'm like, oh yeah, they're a bunch of schmuckos. But you're like, hey, you got to look at the cases like I do. They're a lot different. So we ought to offer some, I guess, deference maybe that way. But the I forget what I was going to say. I think because of the fact that they make all these different opinions, and they're completely operating in contradiction to Downs versus Bidwell, right?
Not entirely.
Okay. See, I knew you were going to say that, but that's good though, because we need to know that.
Well, and this is the issue that I had with Dave Erlinson because Dave Erlinson thought he understood the system well enough to where almost every time he said something, and we're trying to draft legal paperwork, right? And he was doing my legal research, and I'm like, Dave, I can't do that. I can't draft it that way because it's inaccurate. And he's like, we get in these huge, heated moments, and people have to understand, I'm not doing this just so that I can oppose everybody. I'm doing this because I had to retrain myself how to think about the system because I didn't think about it correct. Otherwise, none of this shit that I'm showing you will make any freaking sense to you at all.
Mhm.
I had to make sense out of this damn doctrine, right? I mean, when I read in these points, the District of Columbia and the territories are not states. Well, wait a minute. This is 1901. Does anybody have any idea how many states existed in 1901? Anybody?
I
Bueller? Bueller?
I just remember you saying 1901 was a pivotal point in our history. That was a couple videos ago. So,
Well, here, let's here, I want to do something here. I found a cool website. Let's see if we can find it again.
do you think it would be important for you before we move on to abbreviate what each point on that doctrine is so that we have a firm grasp going forward? Or do you think it's pretty
Okay.
self-explanatory now? Since you didn't really understand it when you first read it, it might be good for the people before we move on to understand what you've learned.
Sure. Yeah, let's okay, so I'm screen sharing this, right? You can see the doctrine.
Yes.
Okay. Let's start at number one. Let's just work through them. I'll explain them as I go. That the District of Columbia and the territories are not states within the judicial clause of the Constitution giving jurisdictions in cases between citizens of different states. That's one of the standing requirements of Article 3. diversity of citizenship. That means there is no diversity of citizenship standing in these when you're in these areas. If you're standing in one of these areas, doesn't exist or it didn't exist, and things are a little different now.
Okay, so that would right there would speak to what we have talked about before, that private rights are not guaranteed in areas of federal jurisdiction, right?
Right,
Okay, good. Perfect.
right,
Just want to make sure I got it.
right. Because you cannot get to the Supreme Court of the United States if you're standing in one of these areas.
Okay.
It doesn't allow it.
Mhm.
Number two, that territories are not states within the meaning of revised statute section 709 permitting writs of error, writs of cert, writs of mandamus from this court in cases where the validity of a state statute is drawn into question. You can't challenge. Notice it says a state statute.
Yeah.
Do you notice that? It doesn't
Mhm.
say territorial statute. The Supreme Court is operating under the assumption here that we're talking about states, not territories.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying? It
Yes.
says
Well,
state statute, not territorial statute.
it's basically stating, as I read it, that that territories are saying that it's about territories, and the fact that they're not states within that definition of the revised statute that allows
Yeah,
certain things
meaning
to happen.
meaning you can't get to the Supreme Court on writ of cert out of one of these areas.
Hmm. Okay.
That the
Just
District of Columbia, point three, that the District of Columbia and the territories are states, as that word is used in treaties with foreign powers,
foreign jurisdiction, right?
with with respect to the ownership, disposition, and inheritance of property, especially if the United States government owns property and it calls the state of Idaho the state of Idaho all the time because it's a political matter.
So we could be saying that this would be, the word is used in treaties and foreign powers. Are we thinking insular type of an environment here?
Yes.
Okay, good. Treating
Yes.
as a foreign entity.
Right.
Ooh, all right.
Right. But because it's domestic, the government in treaties and other things can use the term state, and then it encompasses the geographic boundary and everything inside of it.
Well,
Okay.
is this where we talk about the small s and the capital S, Ron?
Yes.
Okay, there we
Yes.
go.
Now you're getting it.
I know, I'm glad. I don't know if you need to explain that because you could probably do it better than I do, but or if it's even
Well,
important.
so I was using a linguistic construction in the book and using a capital S to denote the state area and using a small s state to denote everything outside of the political subdivision and the 10th Amendment power of the state. So, the linguistic construction I was using was S slash small s, or capital S, small s, because it was a dual. You have legitimate 10th Amendment political subdivisions in the state. Also, you have areas that are not part of the state that are also foreign to the state, small s.
Okay.
So I was using that linguistic construction to denote states that are in this vassal state arrangement.
Okay.
Okay.
Now we're point four.
Point four. That the territories are not within the clause of the Constitution providing for the creation of a Supreme Court and such inferior courts as Congress may see fit to establish.
Okay, so the first thing that I would look at is that the territories are not within the clause of the Constitution. It's not saying that the territories are not in the Constitution, which is going to be the first thing that somebody's going to say. What it's
That's
basically
right.
saying is the territories are not within the clause of the
Uh-huh.
Constitution providing for uh, uh, the Supreme Court, which means they don't have access to the Supreme Court. But
So let's look at it this
it
way.
isn't that the territories are not in the Constitution,
That's right.
because that would be incorporated, if you will, Article 4, Section 3,
Uh-huh.
Clause 2.
Uh-huh.
Okay, good. Just want
Uh-huh.
to make sure.
That's right. You got it, dude. You got
All
it.
right.
You
All right.
got it. You're nailing this. Okay. That the territories, we already covered point two. Okay, so here's what you got. I'm just going to recap 1 through 4. You don't have diversity of citizenship jurisdiction if you're in a territory. You don't have that standing to get to the Supreme Court.
Well,
You
people
can't
aren't going to
challenge.
understand. I don't think people are going to understand that diversity of citizenship. We know that we have dual citizenship. So is what you're talking about? One of those legs are severed?
No, look. No.
Okay, I just want to make sure because that could confuse me really easy. I'm like, I don't know what that means. Diversity of citizenship. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
And maybe everybody that's listening already knows this, and they're like, Tom, let's just move on.
All right. We're going to look at Article 3 of the United States Constitution. I got to do a screen share and
Okay.
do this. Right here. Okay. All right. Section 2. The judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity arising under this Constitution, the laws of the United States, treaties made, or which shall be made under their authority, like all of the treaties that gave this land to the United States of America, for example.
Mm-hmm.
To all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, to all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction, to controversies to which the United States will be a party, to controversies between two or more states, between a state and citizens of another state, between citizens of different states, diversity of citizenship.
Okay, got it.
It's one of the standard requirements to get in front of the Supreme Court.
Okay.
Diversity of citizenship.
Okay.
So what if we go back to the territorial doctrine? Not if you're in a territory, don't have access to it. Bye-bye.
Okay.
3, that they're going to use the term states as it applies to ownership and disposition. And 4, that the territories, if it's territorial, it's not within the clause of the Constitution that extends congressional power to create any Article 3 courts and such inferior courts as Congress may see fit to establish. That's not the same thing as a tribunal. These are inferior federal courts, district courts, not circuit courts. Circuit courts were tribunals. Okay. Number 5, that the Constitution does not apply to foreign countries or to trials therein conducted.
See Section 2.
Okay. So when you
great.
go to the, I for forever I was reading 5. I'm like, it doesn't make any sense until I started reading things like the Rasmussen versus United States, Balzac versus Puerto Rico, etc. There's a bunch of case law, and I'm like, oh, okay, I get it now. If it's territorial, it's considered foreign.
Yes. Well,
If it's unincorporated, I'm sorry.
And
if it's unincorporated territory, it's considered foreign.
Right. Right.
So this is your incorporation, unincorporation issue wrapped up right here in a 6-point doctrine. Let's go to point 6 really quick. In fact, no, I'm going to finish up point 5. That the Constitution does not apply to foreign countries or to trials therein conducted. So basically what point 5 is saying is that the rationale for 1 through 4 is that they're considered foreign. That's the rationale.
Mm-hmm.
And that Congress may lawfully provide for such trials before consular tribunals, meaning every time the Forest Service and the EPA haul you in front of their specific courts, those are consular tribunals. It's exactly what the fuck they are. They've been deceiving everybody, telling everybody that these are actual courts authorized by the Constitution. No, they are not. They are fucking consular tribunals that can only be conducted in foreign territory. It says so right fucking here.
So the reason why Dave Erlinson has a federal has a case before the feds is because he's in a consular tribunal
Well, the first thing that
because he
happened is
was on federal land.
they refused to give him a jury trial.
Mhm.
They refused to give him a jury trial. There are no
Wow.
jury trials. If you're in a hearing in front of the Forest Service or the EPA, there are no such thing as jury trials. Well, let's read a little bit further. That Congress may lawfully provide for such trials before consular tribunals without the intervention of a grand or petty jury. That's
Wow.
how you recognize them. If you're being denied a petty jury trial, you're in a consular tribunal. Right there. And they conduct these against United States citizens in the Western United States every day.
They do.
Every day. They got these going on.
I asked for a jury trial in for speeding. This is kind of dumb, but when I was playing around, I was asking for a jury trial for something simple, and they're like, "You can't have that." And I said,
Yeah.
"Why?" I said, "All it requires is a smaller jury. Instead of six, I think it was, or 12, I think it was six."
Yeah. Petty
So
jury.
our okay. So am I assuming that if I was right in what I had said, that actually is putting me in that type of an environment as well?
I'm not sure. Was it a civil matter or criminal?
So, well, they say it's, I don't know, as a speeding ticket, I think they consider it criminal, but
Well, it's
oh,
misdemeanor, so you're supposed to have access to a petty jury,
uh,
even on misdemeanor criminal cases,
for
because
sure.
it's punitive, right?
Yeah.
So if they're going after you for damages,
Mhm.
the Constitution says you cannot deprive somebody of due process of law. Like if the value in controversy exceeds $20, you're supposed to have the right to a jury trial,
Right. Okay. Good. Got that
right?
covered.
So,
Okay. Cool.
um, now we get to point six, that where the Constitution has been once formally extended by Congress to territories, neither Congress nor the territorial legislature can enact laws inconsistent therewith.
Nice. Would that be, never mind.
Well, so that right there, point six of that doctrine, that is the underlying rationale for Dave Erlinson's case in the Supreme Court right now.
Okay.
They had extended in the 1897 Organic Administration Act, they had extended private rights to the national forests. And now what the Forest Service has been doing since forever is they've been denying citizens their private rights in national forests.
Because
We
they don't,
pointed out point six of the doctrine and said, well, you made a mistake and you can either correct it on your own or we'll take it to the Supreme Court and force you to do it.
so maybe
They
a good,
said, well, we don't believe you can make it to the Supreme Court. Well, guess what?
you made it. So maybe a good question then is, how do you prove that the Constitution was formally extended in the area where he was charged?
You just have to have the legislation. If the
And that,
legislation formally extends something into the area, it'll be written in the legislation. That's how you prove it.
okay, that's something
So what
that's
did we do? We pulled out the 1897 Organic Act. We handed it to him, said, here, read it. In fact, you don't even have to read the whole thing. Here's what we'll do. We'll cut and paste the relevant section out for you.
okay. Good.
And the Department of Justice wanted to fight this until they found that out, and then it said, no, we're not interested. They bailed on the case.
That's
The
great.
Department of Justice,
Yeah.
because it's a loser. They're going to lose.
Hmm. So, okay, should we move on, or is there more to go on that?
I can stop that share. And let's go back to the book screen share. Oh, wait, I forgot. I gotta open up a new book.
Because I know we talked about the land grants, and then I think you talked about Idaho's Organic Act. Idaho forced statehood was next.
Okay, so yeah, we were gonna get into that a little bit, and that's okay. 39. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Okay, so Idaho's admission into the Union. All right, so we talked a little bit earlier about it being a negotiation, right? It was a contractual negotiation between the government and the people of the state who were organizing the state into a territorial legislature. Okay, so every one of the state's admission acts has different elements in it, and you can see that there there were just different things going on. There's a lot more similarities than there are differences, but there are some differences. Okay. So when we get into Idaho's admission act, we want to know, okay, how did Idaho fare in this whole deal? And I was curious about it because I know that Idaho was not directly authorized, or that the creation and the admission of Idaho into the Union, there was no underlying legislation for it, right? We talked about that. There was no enabling legislation for the Louisiana purchases west of the 98th meridian. All right, so this section is out of the Idaho Admission Act. Let me screen. Are you seeing this on the screen share? Do I have it up there?
No, no, you don't.
The Admission Act. Okay. All right. Okay. How about now? There it is. All right. In section 4, you can see there was school land. So section 16 and 36 in every township. We talked about that out of Louisiana. So that's similar to Louisiana. Then you have a grant of land for the erection of public buildings. 50 sections of unappropriated public lands. Okay, so we need to understand what these words mean. Unappropriated. What's unappropriated mean? Unallocated. This is land that the government doesn't have a specific use for. Unappropriated, right?
Mhm.
And then to be selected and located in legal subdivisions. And this is the term subdivisions starts in the land program. So our political subdivisions begins in the land program. So you have all this reconstruction, repair, renovation, furnishings, equipment, yada, 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 right? And it gives you the law where you can find it. Public lands. Per sale, percent paid state for school fund. So the state, under the disposal program, understand that the disposal program is the intent of the entire program, and they wrote it into Idaho's Admission Act, at least right here. But we're going to get into some anomalous stuff here. So you can see that in point 7 here, there was an intent to sell the land, to dispose of it, and for the state to get some of that funding. So if the federal government is not engaging in its mandated disposal, what does that do to the state? It cuts off the flow of funds.
Yeah.
And what were those supposed to be for? For schools. So you got all these problems now funding schools.
So now we have the
You
Fed
restart the land.
now that we're paying tax dollars to the federal government is turning back and allocating that towards these land grants, right? The schools or some of these other things, right?
Yeah, we've got bonds that, there's bonds. There's all these different ways. Basically, it's tax money.
Yeah.
Instead of using the sale of land and the disposal program to fund the schools,
Yeah.
they stopped the disposal program. Now they're tapping you
Right.
when that was not the original intent.
That's great.
Clearly.
I enjoy being tapped.
Isn't that
Sorry.
great? Feels awesome.
It is. Sorry.
University land grant. So entitled an act to grant lands to Dakota, Montana, Arizona, Idaho, Wyoming for university purposes. So they passed enabling legislation. So when you look through this, you see that the state of Idaho, or the federal government rather, the federal government, anytime it did something in its land program, it passed enabling legislation. So it's really curious that you cannot find any enabling legislation for the land program west of the 98th meridian. Doesn't exist. I've been looking for 14 years, never found it. If there was such legislation, it would be so easy to find because the government would be so proud of it that it'd plaster it everywhere. But there is none. Doesn't exist. It's not. We've read almost all the case law on federal land matters, and they've never brought it up into case law. Never. Never. All right. There's a university land grant, penitentiary grant, agricultural land grant, so that the colleges could learn how to farm, teach people how to farm. Specific land grants for various state institutions. Limitations on land grants and their use. The state of Idaho shall not be entitled to any further or other land grants, other grants of any purpose than as expressly provided in this act. Stop right there. Why? Because the intent of the program was not to have the state own the land. The intent of the program was to have the citizen own the land. The state owns very little, the federal government owns very little, the citizens own the bulk of it. That's the intent of the program. And everywhere you look in the admission acts, in the legislation, everywhere where you look, you'll see that that was the intent. Never deviated from it, ever.
Well, so then you go, because you said that the record shows that Idaho basically forced the federal government into something it may have not been prepared for, the admission of Idaho into statehood.
Well, before I get there, I'm going to show you something that the miners in the state of Idaho need to be aware of this. Mineral lands exempted from school land grants. All mineral land shall be exempted from the grants by this act. No mineral lands were to be granted to the state of Idaho. As a matter of fact, there's a portion in the act, there's a portion in the Admission Act that states that if the state of Idaho got granted some land and found out that it was mineral in content, it was supposed to give it back to the government in exchange for some non-mineral land. That was the whole deal. No mineral lands were to ever go to the state.
So is that supposed to
That was
remain?
supposed to go to the people.
Oh, okay. Not the federal government?
No. The mineral lands were supposed to be made available to the people under the mining program. The 1872 mining laws. Okay. Now, I found a case that talked about Idaho's admission into the Union. And the case was heard in Washington because at the time, Idaho didn't have an Article III judge. So cases had to go to Washington to be heard in Washington that had a constitutional outcome. We couldn't do them here, not like we can now. And there's some interesting things to look at in this case. I got a huge section of the case here. I'm going to read it. At the same time that federal officials were negotiating, I got something going. I got a loose tooth in my mouth. It's been loose for a while. It's messing with my speech. Over the boundaries of its reservation, persons in the territory of Idaho began pressing for statehood without waiting for an enactment by Congress of an enabling act. Enabling legislation. Again, everywhere you look, in the case law, in the legislation, everywhere you look, the government didn't do a damn thing without passing enabling legislation on its property, on its territory.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and it's easy to find. If it passed enabling legislation, it's easy to find. All right. Without waiting for enactment by Congress of an enabling act, the territory proceeded to the Constitutional Convention on this day, July 4th, 1889. The Constitution adopted by the convention contained a disclaimer clause identical to one that Congress had included in recent years in the statehood enabling acts. That clause forever disclaimed all right and title to the unappropriated public lands. Stop. Is that significant? Yeah,
Yes.
because the state of Idaho and the other western states have had factions come up trying to seize control of the land inside their borders. When in the Admission Act, it says right here, and you can get the Admission Act, go to Idaho and Fire. If you can't find the full Admission Act, go to Idaho and Fire in the file section, and we have it in the file section on IOF. The full Admission Act.
Is this the website?
Idaho and Fire.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure it was different than the Facebook page.
No. So the Facebook page, Idaho and Fire. Sorry, I'm not being specific. All right. So forever disclaim. All right. So the people of Idaho agreed that they would never assert a claim of any kind against the unappropriated public lands. Now, the unappropriated public lands are the same thing as the unincorporated lands. If they're incorporated, the chances are good that they're appropriated, but that doesn't necessarily mean the same thing either, right? So, like I say, there's not a one-size-fits-all description of this because the government's been playing it loose, fast and loose with the rules, man.
Wow.
So there's no one rule that covers everything.
Wow.
Okay.
Unreal.
The Constitution adopted by the convention contained a disclaimer clause identical to one that Congress had included in recent years in other statehood enabling acts. That clause forever disclaimed all right to entitle to the unappropriated public lands and lands owned or held by any Indians or Indian tribes in Idaho, and recognized that, quote, until the title thereto shall have been extinguished by the United States, the same shall be subject to the disposition of the United States, and said Indian land shall remain under the absolute jurisdiction and control of the Congress of the United States, end quote.
Right.
Here's my problem with this quote that is in this. This was a federal case, a lower federal court case out of Washington. And it was United States versus state of Idaho. I have that Admission Act, and that till the title to thereto shall have been extinguished by the United States does not appear in that Admission Act. Go to the Facebook on Fire, download it, read it for yourself. You won't find it.
Well.
And here it is, indications in a court case. Dude's quoting it. The judge is quoting it out of something. In fact, he's got the citation here, JA 371 to 372. That's the citation. I don't know what that means. To this day, I don't know what JA 371-372 means.
Well, you found it somewhere, right?
Well, so, there's all sorts of shit like this that comes up that you're like, well, wait a minute. The official documentation doesn't say that. Mm-hmm. So where the hell did you get this, right? It's all over the place. All right. So this is where I went into the state of Idaho, all caps, municipal, corporate, United States versus all this stuff, because there's a group of people that have been trying to figure out what the problem with the United States is at the political subdivision level. You and I know some of these people. Mm-hmm. and it was tough sledding, man. And it's tough sledding. They're trying to figure out, okay, why do the judiciaries in the state don't seem to function correctly? Why does it appear that the state of Idaho and all of its buildings and property appear to be privately owned, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
They
There's a whole
treat it
bunch of
like it is, and then you got the fringe flag, and you got the whole 9 yards, right?
yeah, there's some
Okay.
issues.
Yeah.
We don't exactly know per se what all this means, but one thing that we're finding out here is that if we've got a federal land component in the state of Idaho and is considered foreign territory, which it looks like that's what we got, not just Idaho, um, there is no knowing what the United States has actually done with that property, and they've been under no compulsion to be transparent about it. We have no idea. They may not even retain ownership anymore. We wouldn't know.
So
So
these assumptions that we have, we don't really have any way of proving other than
no,
bits and pieces that, people will say, "Oh, it's the Act of 1871." I'm like, "Yeah, maybe, maybe not." The fringe flag. I mean, that was a conversation I had earlier, and you can't just Google it, or, I mean, you have to understand, where it isn't. I think what at USC Title IV, I think it is, and then you've got the Army Manual, and so you have to do a little compare and contrasting there, and figure out what's this and that and the other. Then I had a friend say, "Well, America has had a history of having other fringe flags and all this, so it just further convolutes the whole thing." The only thing that we can say for sure is, if private rights are not guaranteed in the federal domain, I'll call it, or there's all of these questions where they act like they're what I think we were even talking a long time ago about what is that registry that they used to talk about where all the corporations were registered? I can't remember what it is. It's
it
too
was
bad.
it was okay. So they were registered through
It doesn't matter, I guess, but it's just important that
Dun and
Dun and
Bradstreet.
Bradstreet. That's right. And so I always question the legitimacy of just about everything. But we all know that the federal government is acting wacky, and we just don't understand it because it's contrary to so much. It's contrary to what the Constitution says, number one. It's, there's a lot of inconsistencies. And so I think the confusion has really caused people to be fearful. And I think that's a lot of the reason why, groups like yours started, and all of these other things, to go, wait a minute, something's wrong. We legitimately want to figure out what's wrong. And then you had these people that didn't want us to challenge the status quo, telling us that it was wrong without even knowing the information that we were studying. And
So here, I'm just
I'm
going to point out one quick thing to everybody right now. I didn't want to get into this but let's do it because it's up. Let's get into it while it's up. Okay. 1871 Organic Act. If you do read the Organic Act, you will find that it did create a municipal corporation out of Washington, D.C. That is true. So let's see what happened. This is accurate, right? What I'm going to read you is accurate. I've looked into it. It's 100% accurate. The outbreak of the American Civil War in 1861 led to notable growth in the capital's population due to the expansion of the federal government and a large influx of emancipated slaves. By 1870, the district's population had grown 75% to nearly 132,000 residents. Growth was even more dramatic within the county of Washington, where the population would more than double as people escaped the crowded city. The individual local governments within the district were insufficient to handle the population growth. Living conditions were poor throughout the capital, which still had dirt roads and lacked basic sanitation. The situation was so bad that some lawmakers in Congress even suggested moving the capital out further west, but President Ulysses S. Grant refused to consider the proposals. Instead, Congress passed the Organic Act of 1871, which revoked the individual charters of the cities of Washington and Georgetown and combined them with the Washington County to create a unified territorial government for the entire District of Columbia that, yes, was a municipal corporate government.
yeah.
but it was a territorial government
Hmm.
because it's an organic act.
Hmm.
So it's a territorial government. Why? Because Congress is already creating territorial governments. Why would it deviate from that and create something totally different than
Yep.
what at our does anybody listening and watching this have any idea what Occam's razor does? What is the easiest, most simplest explanation?
Go with what they knew.
If Congress was already creating territorial governments,
Yep.
wouldn't it be wouldn't it just I mean, wouldn't it be natural for them to create a territorial government in Washington, D.C.? They were already doing it elsewhere. Why wouldn't they?
Right.
So they did. They passed territorial legislation creating a territorial government in Washington, D.C. The seal of the District of Columbia features the date 1871, reorganizing the year the district's government was incorporated. Municipal corporation. The act did not establish a new city government within the district. Regarding the city of Washington, it stated that the portion of the said district included within the president limits, yada yada yada. In 1873, President Grant appointed an influential member of the Board of Public Works, Alexander Roby Shepherd, to the post of governor. Shepherd authorized a lot of reorganizations and modernizations of Washington. In doing so, however, the governor spent 3 times the money that had been budgeted for capital improvements. Sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
Bankrupting the city. In 1874, Congress replaced the district's quasi-elected territorial government with an appointed 3-member board of commissioners. Direct rule by Congress continued until 73 when they passed the current Home Rule Act.
Oh my.
That means the 1871 territorial government only functioned 3 fucking years. So, what's the problem with the Corp USA underlying rationale? It relies on the 1871 Organic Act, which was repealed after 3 years. So right away, you got a logic problem. You cannot use a repealed act to support your premise any longer. You must use something else now.
Mm-hmm.
And there is nothing else.
Right. Okay. We are just about time. Is that a good place to stop, or was that a
That's a good place to stop because, man, we're gonna, things just get, we're probably gonna go sluggishly through the book for a little while.
I'm sure.
Because it's gonna be like this every interview. So
this one was difficult for me, and
was
I
it?
hope it was less difficult for other people. I don't mind looking difficult on screen for other people. Maybe people go, Tom's confused. So maybe it's okay that I am too. Yeah,
I like the difficulty because it hopefully is shocking people. Like, I want it to shock people. I want people to go, well, wait a minute, that goes against everything I thought I believed in. Wait a minute. Let me go look at all his evidence and see what it says, because there's nothing supporting the narrative that we've been fed. Nothing. I couldn't find anything. Otherwise, I'd present it.
Yeah, and I think that's probably another reason why the audience may be somewhat limited, because in my experience, and I'm sure yours, people they've listened to their rhetoric, and they've really kind of based their existence on one particular thing. And just when I think that I've built myself on a solid foundation, I find out, oh, there's a little more information I'm going to need. So this has really been good for me, because it allows me to I stand firm on what I know, and then, like I think we all do, if we have evidence for what we believe, at least we're not believing in things that we don't have evidence for. But
right,
there's nothing wrong with correction along the way, and I'll be the first.
Well,
to say
so
that,
here's the thing that I believe. I believe that every one of us, whatever, regardless of what we believe, we have the choice of doing one of two things: either believe whatever we want, regardless of the external proof that may be contrary to it. We could do that.
Mm-hmm.
Or we can say, you know what, I'm going to believe the truth no matter what it costs me to believe it. That way, no matter what I believe, it's defensible against any sort of direct or collateral attack.
Right. That's right.
Now, because I've written a book and because I have to interface with the public on it, about it, I have to be able to withstand attack. So I have to be accurate. I cannot afford not to be.
But it doesn't mean that you're not missing pieces of information every once in a while either, right? I mean,
Yes, you're right. And I'm hoping that what I'm doing here, what we're doing here, the writing of the book, compels somebody to find some evidence of something that I missed.
right.
Because I've gone as far as I can go, I can't find anything else. And if I'm deficient, I need to know,
Mhm.
because if somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, dude, you've been talking about this, but here's the reality and here's the evidence to prove it," I want to know as quickly as possible so I can make a correction.
Right. Okay. So if we got a
But
good
I've been
place
doing
to,
this for 14 years and I have yet to find a single person to do that. So,
okay. Well, we'll end this now and we'll pick it up with video 13 the next time we do it. So I wanted to thank everybody that viewed it. If you have any questions, please put those down on the in the comments section. Visit Ron at his website, buy his book, support the author, become part of the solution. The History of Federal Lands in the United States.com. He also takes donations as well. You can find us on Spotify and you can find us on Rumble. I'm gonna have to edit this one, so it might take a little while. But I really appreciate you, Ron. It's great work that you've done. I'm really glad to be a student of yours, and I hope that we can start screaming this from the mountaintops. So I just
yeah,
appreciate you
there's a
joining me.
lot going on right now politically, and it looks like to me, and I think other people and you as well, that the way things are moving politically in the United States, we're going to have a clash on this subject very soon.
Oh, and
So,
would it help if more people knew it? So jump on
agreed.
board, everybody. All right, man. Well, thanks a lot. I appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
All right, buddy. Thanks, Tom. See you.